So where do we go from here with about 3 trillion naira tax revenue deficit in the year we're trying to dig our way out of recession?
Well, I think the government just needs to keep intensifying its effort, and that's why the subject we touched on earlier with the sensitization, with the campaign, and with the awareness, it's something that is commendable. But that's just a part of the step that is required. I think our laws, indeed, the entire tax regulation actually need a complete revision. We need to actually revise them and make it a lot more, a lot easier. If you look at the voluntary asset and income declaration scheme, for example, the way it's been operated, you will expect every business that have presence in almost every part of the country to approach over 36 different tax authorities trying to put its tax affairs in order. I think that's humongous. I think that's too much. Why can't we have a central body where an application is jointly submitted to, and these tax authorities are gathered in one room under the auspices of the Joint Tax Board to make sure that it's just one single process that is seamless? But you're going to have taxpayers dealing with 36 different tax authorities, including the federal tax authorities, just because they intend to take advantage of the tax law, of the tax amnesty, and just because that's the way our tax laws are structured.
So we should have dealt with the law before we roll it out?
I think so. But, you know, we haven't got the time. So, and that's why it seems to be dissipating energy in every direction. And it explains the reason why the result is not exactly what we're expecting it to be.
Do you think sometimes, you're the taxman, I'm sure you're not expected to be so, quote-unquote, merciful with the one who is paying the tax. The taxman don't seem to understand all that. But again, don't you think that the business environment is tough, and had been tough in Nigeria, that businesses and individuals are finding it difficult to actually pay tax?
Well, I agree with the postulation that the business environment is tough. That's a fact. The statistics are there to support it. But taxation is not about mercy. Taxation is about what the law says. So taxation is about giving a fraction of whatever it is that you're making in line with the provisions of the law. And that's why I get very troubled when there's any attempt by any tax authority not to abide by the provisions of the law. Because the law clearly indicates what is payable, how it should be paid. It doesn't matter whether there are loopholes, whether there are gaps within the law. So if there are gaps within the law, the gaps wasn't created by the taxpayer. The state is the one that put the law in place. So if there are gaps within the law, which the taxpayer is exploiting to his advantage, it behoves on the government and on the state to go and fix that, rather than to pass on that burden on the taxpayer. So yes, the business environment is tough, but you can't forgive tax for everybody. Everybody needs to pay a fraction of what is required. So the business environment is tough, but government's obligation and expectation on the part of the government isn't reducing. In fact, it's increasing. So government also needs to defray the cost of governance. Government needs to provide the amenities, and that's where payment of taxes can't be excused because the business environment is tough. They've got to exist simultaneously.
Yeah, but again, social media is not so friendly about the fact that, yes, folks complain they can't see the tax work for them, and some think that should be an excuse. I've had a lot of battle on saying, look, you just have to pay tax no matter what. What's your view?
Well, I think it's a chicken and egg. So which comes first? So do you want to pay your tax so that the government have enough to be able to fix all of the amenities, or do you want to wait until government becomes sufficiently accountable before you do that? The reality is that we need much more than we have on the table to be able to fix this economy. I made an analogy when I looked at the budget for 2017, that the entire budget of the Federation, federal government, all of the 36 states, all of the local government, put all together, it's probably less than 60 billion US dollar. That's less than half of what South Africa had in its annual budget. And if you compare the level of infrastructural deficit between those two countries, you realize that we are far from where South Africa is, for example, for a fraction of our population. So government needs the money, and all of the money, to be able to service what we want. What I think we should do is not to ask for taxes not to be paid, but we need to be a lot more demanding Demand accountability, demand transparency, make sure that your money is being judiciously utilized. That's the only call that we can have that will be valid. We can't have a call to say, let me go tax-free because the business environment is tough.
Yeah, but you think no one should go tax-free. Does that include some not-for-profit organization? A bit of conversation also recent times whether some not-for-tax organizations, whatever, perhaps who have some businesses tied to the back end should also step forward and pay tax.
Well, that's where the distinction comes. So within our law, if you are a not-for-profit organization, to the extent that all of your income is attributable to that non-profit organization, you're not liable to pay any tax. But what happens is that you have a number of NGOs and not-for-profits who have some businesses in your words tied to what they're doing. So if you are involved in any business activity, it doesn't matter whether you are a religious organization, whether you are an NGO, or whether you are into full-fledged commercial activity, you're supposed to pay tax that is attributable to that business venture. So the exemption is only limited to the not-for-profit activity, the primary purpose for which that organization was set up. So if you have a business tied on the back of that, tax is supposed to be payable.
But it looks mixed because you're collecting money from the right hand and you're using it to do, from a not-profit activity here, and you're using it to do a for-profit business here. So the money gets mixed and there is no, looks like it's not clear which money is what.
It can be mixed. It shouldn't be mixed. So if you have a business venture set up, it's supposed to be set up under proper legal structure. So do you have a business venture, do you have a limited liability company, or are you using the non-for-profit vehicle, which will be in contravention of the law? If you look at the certificate of registration that is issued for any not-for-profit, it is stated it doesn't permit commercial activities. So if you're using a not-for-profit vehicle to actually get into business, you're actually doing more than contravening the provisions of the tax law. You are actually contravening the provision under which you were set up.
So if folks donate money to me, my cost for this, and I take it to make a bread factory, what happens?
So the bread factory, it's a business, different from the NGO that is receiving donations. So if you receive donation as an NGO, there are objects, there are purposes for which that donation can be used. So if you use it for the purposes that the NGO was set up, it wouldn't be taxed. But if you get outside of that scheme to set up a business venture, then the business venture itself as an entity, as a legal vehicle, is supposed to pay tax.
Mm. And I can't take the money from the commercial enterprise back into the not-for-profit and just
but they're supposed to be corporate governance. So
that brings us to corporate governance.
Absolutely.
I just took that out of my mouth because it looks like, well, I'm living big, I'm living large. So where's the money coming from? Is it from the donations or from the business enterprise?
Maybe that probably explains the dilemma the government is seeing from where it sees it, and all of these rules around NGO bill, the Code of Corporate Governance that the FRC tried to issue at some point earlier on. That's why many of those...
Because the conversation is that it looks like a lot of folks with a lot of money that should be paying tax are hiding under the not-for-profit.
I don't think they will be able to hide for any longer. The rules are getting tighter. The awareness and the sensitization is a lot more in the public, and that's why the government also is sitting up and trying to make sure that gates are put in the appropriate places so that people are checkmated.
And when all this happens, those who make more money are those of you who are in the tax business, isn't it?
And for the government to be able to service every one of us.
Well, that sounds nice. Thank you.
Thank you so
very much. Yomi Olubenro, who is our partner and the West Africa tax leader at Akitola Williams Deloitte. I hope we've unpacked that a little bit for you.